She called them dirty and unwanted in front of 200 guests. But what she didn't know was that the twin black girls she just humiliated were the daughters of a billionaire CEO and the owners of the very venue she was standing in. One phone call from them, and the wedding everyone thought would be perfect froze in utter silence. By the end of the night, the bride's dream day was over, and the twins' father had turned her world upside down. Before we find out what happens next, tell us where you're watching from. And if you believe karma never misses, smash that like button. The air at the Prescott estate was thick with the scent of money and roses. Sunlight spilled across a perfectly manicured lawn, glinting off the crystal flutes of champagne held in perfectly manicured hands. It was the wedding rehearsal, and every detail was designed to scream perfection. But at the center of this flawless world was a storm named Haley Prescott. The bride, a vision in a white sundress that cost more than most people's rent, was not happy. Her smile was a tight, painted line, and her eyes darted everywhere, searching for flaws. She found them in everything. The flowers were not the right shade of ivory. The string quartet was a half-beat too slow. The caterer had arranged the canapés in a way she found deeply, personally offensive. "No, no, no," she snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. She pointed a finger at a young man from the catering staff. "The salmon puffs go on the silver trays, not the crystal ones. Are you trying to ruin my day before it even begins?" The young man, barely out of his teens, flushed with embarrassment and mumbled an apology, quickly rearranging the food. Haley didn't wait for him to finish. She turned her attention to the wedding planner, a woman named Eleanor Davis, whose face was a mask of strained patience. "Eleanor, did you see that? This is the kind of incompetence I'm talking about. My fiancé's family is used to a certain standard." She said the word standard as if it were a jewel she was holding up to the light. The truth was, Haley wasn't marrying into old money. She was marrying into new money, trying desperately to look old. And she was the general leading the charge. Guests mingled awkwardly, trying to ignore the bride's tirades. They talked in hushed tones, their laughter a little too loud, a little too forced. They were all part of the performance, actors in Haley's grand play. And then, two figures appeared at the edge of the lawn who were clearly not in the script. Ava and Aria Coleman arrived without fanfare. They were 19, twins, and dressed in a way that made them invisible in this sea of designer labels. Ava wore a simple gray hoodie and jeans, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Aria was in a similar outfit, a dark blue sweatshirt and comfortable sneakers. They carried a small, elegantly wrapped gift, and their expressions were open and friendly. They weren't trying to impress anyone, they were just there to offer their congratulations. They had been told the groom's mother, a kind woman they knew through a charity organization, would be here. They scanned the crowd, looking for a familiar face, their smiles genuine. But their presence did not go unnoticed for long. Haley's eyes, constantly scanning for imperfections, landed on them like a hawk spotting its prey. Her painted smile vanished, replaced by a sneer of pure disgust. The air around her grew cold. She didn't ask who they were. She didn't wonder what they were doing there. She saw their simple clothes, their quiet demeanor, and she made a judgment. "Who let them in?" she said, her voice low and dangerous. Her bridesmaids, a flock of identically dressed women, turned to see what had caught her attention. Haley started walking toward the twins, her heels sinking slightly into the soft grass, a general marching into battle. The murmur of conversation around them died down as people noticed the unfolding drama. Ava and Aria saw her approaching and offered a small, polite smile, unsure of who she was, but assuming she was part of the wedding party. Haley stopped a few feet in front of them, her arms crossed. She looked them up and down, a slow, deliberate act of dismissal. "What do you two want?" she demanded. There was no greeting, no politeness, just pure, uncut aggression. Ava, always the more talkative of the two, spoke up. Her voice was calm and steady. "We're friends of the groom's mother," she explained. "We just wanted to stop by to congratulate her and drop off a small gift." She held up the present slightly, a gesture of peace. Haley let out a short, sharp laugh that held no humor. It was a sound of disbelief and mockery. "Friends? You?" She looked at their hoodies again. "You look like you're here to clean the tents after the party's over." A few guests nearby tittered nervously. They knew this was wrong, but they were too afraid of Haley to say anything. Arya's smile faltered. She felt a familiar sting of prejudice, an old wound that never quite healed. But she remembered her father's words. "Stay calm. Let them show you who they really are." So she remained silent, her expression unreadable. Haley wasn't finished. She felt the eyes of her guests on her, and it fueled her. She was the star of this show, and she would not have it ruined by people who didn't belong. "I don't know who you think you are, but you are not welcome here, not in my wedding." Her voice rose with each word, becoming a declaration for everyone to hear. "Look at you. You're dressed like maids. We don't let people like you near the family photos. It would lower the tone." A collective gasp went through the crowd. This time it wasn't quiet. It was a sharp intake of breath, a sound of shock. The nervous laughter died completely. The silence that followed was heavy and uncomfortable. Ava and Arya stood perfectly still. The insult was a physical blow, and they felt it deep in their chests. But on the outside they showed nothing. Their faces remained calm, their posture unbroken. This was the test their father had spoken of. Haley, drunk on her own power, didn't notice their composure. She saw only their silence, and she took it as weakness. She turned to a nearby security guard. "Get them out of here," she commanded, waving a dismissive hand. "Now. I don't want their kind of dirt anywhere near my wedding." The security guard, a large man with a weary expression, looked from Haley to the twins. He hesitated for a moment, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He saw no threat in the two young women. He saw only the bride's cruelty. But his job was to follow orders. With a sigh, he walked toward them. "I'm sorry, ladies," he said, his voice low. "You'll have to come with me." Ava and Arya nodded once, without a word. They turned and began to walk away, the guard escorting them toward the gate. They walked with their heads held high, their steps even and deliberate. They did not look back. From across the lawn, a young waiter named Liam Carter watched the entire exchange. He was holding a tray of empty champagne flutes, but his hands had frozen mid-task. A chilling stillness had fallen over him. The color had drained from his face. His mouth was slightly open, but no words came out. He felt a knot of anger and disgust tighten in his stomach. He had seen Haley be rude to the staff all day, but this was different. This was pure, unadulterated cruelty. He looked at the twins as they were led away, and something about their quiet dignity, their unshakable calm, sent a shiver down his spine. He had a strange, powerful feeling that this was not the end. It was just the beginning. The twins were gone, but the poison of Haley's words lingered in the air. She stood triumphant, a queen who had just banished peasants from her court. She basked in the silence, mistaking fear for respect. With the problem removed, she turned back to her audience, a bright, false smile plastered on her face. "Well, now that the trash has been taken out," she announced loudly so everyone could hear, "we can get back to the celebration." A few of her closest friends, the bridesmaids who orbited her like moons, laughed on cue. But for many of the guests, the mood had soured. They picked up their champagne glasses, but the bubbles seemed to have gone flat. They looked at each other with wide, uncomfortable eyes. Whispers started to ripple through the crowd like a foul wind. "Did you hear what she said?" one guest murmured to another. "That was just awful, truly awful." Another woman, dressed in a silk dress, shook her head. "That was too far," she whispered to her husband, "even for Haley." But no one said it loud enough for the bride to hear. No one dared to confront the queen. Haley, oblivious or perhaps simply indifferent to the discomfort she had caused, was reveling in her victory. She walked over to her circle of bridesmaids, who immediately showered her with praise. "You were amazing, Haley," one of them gushed. "You really put them in their place." Haley preened under the attention. "Of course I did," she said, taking a sip of her champagne. "Some people just don't understand boundaries. They think they can just wander into a private event. Maybe they should go back to cleaning tables somewhere. That's probably what they were looking for anyway. A job." Her friends giggled, the sound sharp and ugly. As Haley and her court continued to mock the departed twins, Ava and Arya were just outside the ornate iron gates of the estate. They hadn't gone far. They simply stepped aside, moving to a quiet spot behind a large, sculpted hedge, out of sight of the party. The hurt from Haley's words was a sharp ache in Ava's chest. She wanted to be angry, to scream. But she looked at her sister, Arya, whose face was a mask of calm resolve. Arya met her gaze and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was a silent message they had shared 1,000 times since childhood. We're in this together. We are stronger than their hate. Ava took a deep breath, pushing down the anger and letting a cold, clear purpose rise in its place. She pulled out her phone. Arya did the same. They didn't need to discuss what to do next. The plan was already in motion. Ava found the contact in her phone, a single word. Dad. She pressed the call button. The phone rang only once before he picked up. His voice was calm, as it always was. "Girls?" "Hi, Dad," Ava said, her own voice steady and even. There was no trace of the humiliation she had just endured. There was no quiver of anger, no hint of tears. There was only focus. "It happened, just like you thought it might." On the other end of the line, Marcus Coleman listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't ask for details. He knew his daughters. He knew their strength. "We're ready," Ava said simply. Arya, listening on her own phone, added, "Yes, Dad, we're ready." That was all they needed to say. No names were mentioned. No threats were made. No elaborate plan was discussed. It was a simple confirmation. A switch had been flipped. "I understand," Marcus said. His voice was still calm, but there was a new edge to it. A firmness like solid steel. "Thank you for letting me know. I'll take it from here." The call ended. The twins put their phones away. They looked at each other for a long moment. The hurt was still there, but now it was mixed with something else. A sense of impending justice. They had done their part. They had been the test. And Haley Prescott had failed spectacularly. Now it was their father's turn. Back inside the party, Liam the waiter was moving through the crowd, his hands on autopilot as he cleared glasses and plates. But his mind was far away. He couldn't shake the image of the twins' faces. The initial polite smiles, the flicker of hurt, and the final unnerving calm. He slipped into a back corridor near the kitchens, needing a moment to breathe. The sound of Haley's shrill laughter echoed from the lawn, and it made his skin crawl. He had worked dozens of events like this. He had seen rich, entitled people act badly before. But this felt different. It was darker, more vicious. Haley hadn't just been rude. She had been cruel for the sport of it. He saw Eleanor, the wedding planner, leaning against a wall. Her eyes closed for a second as if she was trying to block out the noise. She looked exhausted. Liam approached her cautiously. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. Eleanor opened her eyes. She saw the distress on Liam's face and knew he was talking about what had happened with the two girls. She let out a long, tired sigh. "I've been dealing with her for 6 months," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "This is nothing new. She's bullied every vendor, yelled at half the staff, and even made 2 of her own bridesmaids cry." She shook her head in disgust. "But that, out there, that was the worst I've seen." "Who were they?" Liam asked. "Those girls?" "I don't know," Eleanor admitted. "Friends of the groom's mother, they said. But Haley didn't even bother to ask. She just attacked." Liam's conscience was screaming at him. He knew he should just keep his head down, do his job, and collect his paycheck. He needed this job. But he also knew that staying silent felt like being an accomplice to Haley's cruelty. Someone should do something, he muttered, more to himself than to Eleanor. He thought about what Haley had said, the way she had sneered and laughed. He thought about the security guard who had been forced to escort the girls out. What if Haley's team tried to erase what had happened? What if they pretended it never occurred? A sudden resolve hardened within him. He wouldn't let them. He pulled out his phone and discreetly opened the voice memo app. He found a quiet corner in the service hallway and began to speak, his voice low but clear, recounting every single detail he had witnessed. Haley's words, the guests' reactions, the calm expressions of the twins as they were forced to leave. He described everything. When he was done, he had another idea. He knew the estate was covered in high-end security cameras. He also knew that Haley's personal assistant, a man as arrogant as his boss, had been given temporary access to the system. Liam quietly made his way to the small security office. As he suspected, the assistant wasn't there. He was probably out on the lawn, flattering Haley. Liam slipped inside. It took him only a few minutes to find the footage from the camera overlooking the entrance. He saw it all again. The twins arriving. Haley's aggressive approach, the public humiliation. With trembling fingers, he downloaded the clip to a small, hidden flash drive he kept on his keychain. He slipped out of the office, his heart pounding. He didn't know who the girls were, and he didn't know if anything would come of this. But he had evidence. He had the truth. If someone asks, he whispered to himself, the words a promise. If anyone ever asks, I'll tell them what really happened. He didn't know it yet, but someone was going to ask, and his quiet act of courage was about to change everything. Earlier that same day, the world had looked very different for Ava and Arya. They were not at a lavish estate, but in a sun-drenched penthouse apartment that overlooked the city skyline. The smell of fresh coffee and pancakes filled the air. They were laughing with their father, Marcus Coleman, a man whose quiet demeanor hid the fact that he was one of the most powerful CEOs in the country. He was the founder and head of the Coleman Group, a global conglomerate with interests in technology, real estate, and hospitality. Among its many assets was a luxury venue called Silverwood Estate, the very place Haley Prescott had rented for her dream wedding. Marcus watched his daughters with a warm smile. They were the center of his universe. They were smart, compassionate, and despite the immense wealth they were born into, they were grounded. He had made sure of it. He had taught them that a person's true worth was not measured by their bank account, but by their character. Today, he was about to give them a real-world lesson. So, he said, setting down his coffee cup, I have a small favor to ask of you two. Ava and Arya exchanged a curious glance. A favor? Arya asked, popping a blueberry into her mouth. What is it? There's a wedding rehearsal at Silverwood today, he began. The bride's family, the Prescotts, have been difficult. I've been getting some troubling reports from the staff. Whispers of mistreatment, of disrespect. The venue manager is worried, but he doesn't have any concrete proof. The family is very influential, and they've made it clear they'll crush anyone who complains. He leaned forward, his expression serious. I need to know what's really happening there. But if I show up, or if any of my executives do, everyone will be on their best behavior. I need eyes and ears on the ground, someone who can see how these people act when they think no one important is watching. Ava's eyes lit up with understanding. You want us to go, she said. It wasn't a question. Under the radar, Marcus confirmed with a nod. Dress down, just be yourselves. Mingle if you can, observe. I've already spoken with the groom's mother, Mrs. Carter. She's a wonderful woman involved in one of our foundation's charities. She knows you're coming and will be happy to see you. She'll be your reason for being. There, Arya grinned. She loved these kinds of tests. They felt like a secret mission. "So, we're spies?" Marcus chuckled. "Something like that. But there's one very important rule." He looked at both of them, his gaze firm. "No matter what happens, no matter what anyone says or does to you, you stay calm. You do not react. You do not get angry. Your silence will reveal more about their character than your anger ever could. Just watch, listen, and remember. Can you do that for me?" "Of course, Dad," they said in unison. They understood the principle perfectly. It was a lesson he had taught them since they were children. True strength wasn't about shouting the loudest. It was about having the quiet confidence to stand your ground without losing your dignity. And so, they had gone. They had dressed in their most unremarkable clothes, taken a simple ride-share to the estate, and walked in with nothing but a small gift and open hearts. They had walked directly into the fire, just as their father had suspected they might. Now, hours later, back in the present moment, the twins stood outside the gates, the scene of their humiliation behind them. The quiet calm they had maintained was still there, but now it was a shield. After the brief call to their father, another car, a sleek black sedan with tinted windows, pulled up silently to the curb. The driver, a man they had known their whole lives, got out and opened the door for them without a word. He knew from the single text he'd received from Marcus that the mission was over. As the car pulled away from Silverwood Estate, Ava's phone buzzed again. It was their father. "Are you both okay?" he asked, his voice laced with a father's concern that overrode the CEO's strategic mind. "We're fine, Dad," Ava assured him. "A little shaken, but we're fine. It was ugly." "I'm sorry you had to go through that," he said, and they could hear the genuine regret in his voice. "But you did exactly what I asked. You were strong and you were dignified. I am incredibly proud of you both." There was a brief pause. When he spoke again, the warmth was replaced by that same steely resolve they had heard earlier. "Thank you," he said simply. "Leave the rest to me." They knew what that meant. Their father was a man of few words, but his actions were seismic. He did not make idle threats. He did not engage in petty arguments. When he decided to act, he moved mountains. And for Haley Prescott, a storm was gathering, a storm she was blissfully unaware of, a storm she had created with her own hateful words. The test was over. The consequences were about to begin. Liam Carter's heart was still hammering against his ribs as he slipped the small flash drive into his pocket. The act of defiance, small as it was, felt monumental. He was just a temp waiter, one of dozens hired for the weekend. He was nobody, a ghost in the background of this lavish production. Losing this job would be a serious blow. He had rent to pay, a younger sister to support. The fear of getting caught was a cold knot in his stomach. But the image of those two girls being publicly shamed for no reason other than their appearance was burned into his mind. It felt more important than his fear. He wrestled with his decision all afternoon. Should he give the footage to the venue manager? He dismissed the idea almost immediately. The manager was a good man, but he was terrified of the Prescott family and their connections. He would likely bury the evidence to avoid a confrontation. Should he leak it online? That felt too messy, too unpredictable. It could backfire, and he could be sued. He felt trapped, holding a piece of the truth with nowhere to take it. His shift ended as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the perfect lawn. The rehearsal party was winding down, the guests departing in their luxury cars. Liam changed out of his uniform in the staff locker room, his mind still racing. As he was leaving, he saw Eleanor, the wedding planner, packing up her binders and laptop. She looked even more drained than before. On an impulse, he walked over to her. "Eleanor," he said, his voice quiet. "I need to talk to you. In private." She looked up, surprised, but saw the seriousness in his eyes. She nodded and led him to a small, empty office away from the remaining staff. Liam closed the door behind them. He took a deep breath. "I did something," he said. "After what happened with those girls, I couldn't just let it go. I recorded a statement on my phone saying exactly what I saw, and I got the security footage." Eleanor's eyes widened. For a moment, she looked terrified. "Liam, you can't. If Haley finds out, she'll destroy you. Her fiancé's father is a lawyer with a reputation for ruining people." "I know it's a risk," Liam said, his voice gaining strength as he spoke. "But it was wrong, Eleanor. It was more than just rude, it was hateful. And everyone just stood there and watched. I watched. I didn't say anything, and I feel sick about it. This footage, it's the truth. We can't let her get away with it and pretend it didn't happen." Eleanor stared at him, a flicker of admiration in her tired eyes. She had been in the event planning business for 15 years. She had seen her share of difficult clients, of bridezillas. But Haley was in a league of her own. She had bullied, threatened, and belittled everyone involved in the wedding. Eleanor herself had been brought to tears more than once by Haley's vicious verbal attacks. She had stayed silent because, like Liam, she needed the job. Her company's reputation depended on it. But Liam's courage was a spark in the dark. It made her question her own silence. "You're right," she said softly, a new resolve in her voice. "You're absolutely right." She thought for a moment. "I don't know who those girls were, but they didn't deserve that. Nobody does." She looked at Liam, making a decision. "Hold on to that evidence, Liam. Don't show it to anyone yet. Let's just see what happens. But if someone official asks what went on here today, I'll back you up. I'll tell them everything I've seen for the last 6 months." A wave of relief washed over Liam. He wasn't alone. Just having one other person who was willing to acknowledge the truth made him feel braver. He nodded, a silent pact passing between the overworked planner and the underpaid waiter. They were two small people standing against a very powerful and unpleasant woman. They had no idea that a much greater power was already moving in their favor, set in motion by a quiet phone call from the very girls they sought to defend. The next day, the day of the wedding, dawned bright and clear. It was a perfect day by all accounts. But inside the grand ballroom of Silverwood Estate, a sense of chaos was brewing. Haley Prescott, dressed in a silk robe with bride embroidered on the back and glittering rhinestones, was in a full-blown rage. She swept into the ballroom, expecting to see a scene of floral perfection, and was met with nothing. The tables were bare. The florists were standing around, looking confused. The lighting crew was packing up their equipment. "What is going on?" she shrieked, her voice echoing in the cavernous room. "My wedding is in 8 hours. Why is nothing done? Where are my orchids?" A flustered-looking man from the floral company approached her nervously. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he stammered. "We got an email an hour ago from the venue management. All deliveries have been suspended until further notice." "Suspended?" Haley screeched. "What do you mean, suspended? No one suspends my wedding." She stormed through the venue, a hurricane of fury. It was the same story everywhere she went. The catering trucks were being turned away at the gate. The band was being told there was a logistical issue, and they should wait for new instructions. Every staff member she cornered gave her the same vague, unhelpful answers. "We're just following orders, ma'am. There's been a directive from corporate." "We don't have any more information." Haley was losing her mind. She got her fiancé, a man who seemed perpetually nervous in her presence, on the phone. "Do something," she screamed into the receiver. "Your family is supposed to own half the city. Call someone. Make them fix this." She bragged about her fiancé's family constantly, inflating their influence to suit her own ego. They were wealthy, yes, but they were not the untouchable titans she made them out to be. As she fumed, Eleanor and Liam watched from a distance. They had both been called in early, told only that their presence was required. A strange sense of calm had settled over the venue, a stark contrast to Haley's frantic panic. Staff members were speaking in low voices, a current of uncertainty running through them. But it wasn't chaotic. It felt controlled, as if a hidden hand was now pulling the strings. Haley, in her arrogance, couldn't see it. She couldn't imagine a world where she wasn't the most important person in the room. This had to be a mistake, a ridiculous, unprofessional glitch. She started mocking the very people who were trying to help her. "This is what you get for hiring cheap labor," she sneered to one of her bridesmaids, loud enough for the nearby staff to hear. She was completely oblivious to the fact that her world was slowly, quietly, and irrevocably falling apart around her. She remembered the two girls from the day before, and a cruel smile touched her lips. "This is probably their fault," she said with a laugh. "They probably put a curse on this place with their bad energy." She savored the memory of their humiliation. "I bet they're begging for bus fare home right now, telling everyone how they almost got into a high society wedding. They should have been grateful we even let them breathe the same air." Eleanor overheard the comment and her blood ran cold. She exchanged a look with Liam. "She has no idea," she whispered. "She really has no idea what's coming." Haley continued to strut around the half-empty ballroom, a queen ruling over a crumbling kingdom, issuing orders that no one was following, completely unaware that the trap she had set for two innocent girls was now closing in on her. Miles away, in a quiet, minimalist office with a view that stretched to the horizon, Marcus Coleman was calm. He wasn't angry, he wasn't yelling. He was simply executing a plan. The reports from his daughters had confirmed his worst suspicions. The disrespect shown to them was a symptom of a deeper rot, a culture of arrogance and cruelty that he would not tolerate on his property or under his name. He picked up his phone and made a single quiet call. It wasn't to security. It wasn't to a lawyer to file a lawsuit. It was to the general manager of Silverwood Estate and the executive board of the Coleman Group's hospitality division, all patched into a conference call. His voice was low, steady, and carried the weight of absolute authority. "Good morning," he said, his tone leaving no room for pleasantries. "As of this moment, Silverwood Estate is to be shut down. All events are cancelled, effective immediately. All deliveries are to be stopped. All non-essential staff are to be sent home with full pay for the day. I want the property secured. No one in, no one out without my direct authorization." There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line. The general manager, a man named Mr. Harris, finally found his voice. "Mr. Coleman, sir. With all due respect, we have a wedding today, the Prescott wedding. It's $1 million event. The bride is already on site. We can't just shut down." Marcus's voice became even quieter, which always meant he was more serious. "Mr. Harris, you misunderstand. This is not a suggestion. It is an order. The Prescott wedding will not be happening at our venue. Not today, not ever. Is that clear?" The finality in his tone was unmistakable. The board members, who knew better than to question Marcus Coleman when he used that voice, murmured their assent. Mr. Harris, though confused and terrified, simply said, "Yes, sir, it's clear." "Good," Marcus continued. "Now for your next instruction. I need the grand ballroom prepared. I want a podium, a screen, and seating for 50 people. The board will be in attendance. The Prescott and Carter families are to be summoned to the ballroom at 10 a.m. sharp for a mandatory announcement regarding the status of their event. Ensure my daughters, Ava and Aria Coleman, are given a private suite to prepare. And, Mr. Harris," he added, "I need you to locate 2 staff members for me, a wedding planner named Eleanor Davis and a waiter named Liam Carter. I want them in that room as well. They are to be treated as honored guests." Another wave of confusion rippled through the people on the call. The name Coleman was now connected to the chaos. The puzzle pieces were starting to click into place, but no one could see the full picture yet. The call ended. Within minutes, the orders cascaded down the chain of command at Silverwood Estate. Security was tightened. Staff received new cryptic instructions. The gears of the massive operation ground to a halt, and then began to turn in a completely new direction. The confusion among the florists and caterers turned into a controlled, orderly shutdown. Haley Prescott, still raging in the lobby, saw the shift. She saw staff members moving with a new purpose, a purpose that had nothing to do with her wedding. She tried to demand answers, but she was met with polite, unshakable stonewalling. "There will be an announcement in the ballroom at 10 a.m., Miss Prescott," was all they would say. "All your questions will be answered then." She scoffed, still wrapped in her bubble of self-importance. A mandatory announcement? How ridiculous. This must be about some minor glitch, a power outage or a plumbing issue. She rolled her eyes at her mother. "They'll probably offer us a discount for the inconvenience." As they should. She was annoyed, but not yet truly worried. In her mind, the world revolved around her. The idea that this massive, coordinated shutdown could have anything to do with her brief, cruel encounter with two girls in hoodies was impossible. It was a thought that could not even enter her mind. She was very, very wrong. The mountain was about to come to her. At precisely 10 o'clock, the grand ballroom doors swung open. Haley Prescott swept in, her annoyance radiating off her in waves. She was dressed in a pristine white silk pantsuit, her hair and makeup flawless. She was ready to demand apologies and compensation. She was ready for a fight, but the scene that greeted her stopped her cold. The color drained from her face. This was not an apology. This was an execution. The ballroom was not set up for a wedding. It was arranged like a corporate hearing. Rows of chairs faced a simple wooden podium at the front of the room. The room was filled, not with wedding guests, but with somber-faced men and women in dark business suits. Haley recognized some of them from magazines. They were executives, lawyers, board members of powerful corporations. They sat silently, their gazes fixed on the front of the room. Her fiancé and his family were already there, seated in the front row, their faces pale and confused. Her own parents were there, looking terrified. And near the back, to her utter disbelief, sat the waiter from yesterday, Liam, and her own wedding planner, Eleanor. They weren't serving. They were seated, watching her. Small video cameras were positioned discreetly around the room, their red recording lights glowing ominously. The air was thick with a tension so heavy it was hard to breathe. And at the center of it all, standing near the podium but not yet behind it, was a man Haley had never seen before. He was tall, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, and he radiated an aura of calm, absolute power that filled the entire room. He was silent. He was watching her. It was Marcus Coleman. Haley froze in the doorway, her arrogant stride faltering. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. This was wrong. This was all terribly wrong. What was happening? She looked at her fiancé, who gave her a helpless shrug. She looked at her mother, who looked like she was about to faint. The silence in the room was a living thing, pressing in on her from all sides. The men and women in suits were staring at her, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and cold judgment. The man at the front of the room let the silence stretch, allowing Haley's confusion to curdle into fear. Every second that passed stripped away another layer of her self-assuredness. She was no longer the queen of her own wedding. She was a defendant in a courtroom she didn't understand. Finally, Marcus Coleman stepped forward. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Every ear in the silent room was hanging on his next word. His voice was steady, calm, and carried an undeniable weight. "Good morning. Thank you all for being here. I am Marcus Coleman." A few quiet gasps came from the Carter family, who recognized the name. The Prescott family just looked blank. The name meant nothing to them. "Before we proceed with any event here," Marcus continued, his gaze sweeping across the room before landing squarely on Haley, "there's a matter of great importance we need to address. A matter of character, of dignity, and of respect." Haley's heart began to pound a frantic, panicked rhythm against her ribs. She didn't understand, but a primal sense of dread was starting to creep up her spine. This man's eyes were looking right through her, as if he could see every ugly thought she'd ever had. Marcus made a small, simple gesture toward a side door. "This is a family-owned business," he said, his voice hardening almost imperceptibly. "And in our family we have certain values that are non-negotiable." The side door opened, and into the room stepped Ava and Aria Coleman. The transformation was breathtaking. They were no longer the invisible girls in hoodies and jeans. Today they were dressed in elegant tailored dresses that spoke of quiet sophistication. Their hair was styled perfectly, their makeup subtle but flawless. They walked into the room not with arrogance, but with a powerful, innate grace. They radiated the same quiet confidence as their father. They were his daughters, and it was now unmistakably clear to everyone in the room. A wave of shocked gasps echoed through the ballroom. Haley's jaw dropped. It was a physical, uncontrolled reaction. She stared, her mind refusing to process what her eyes were seeing. Those girls?" she stammered, pointing a trembling finger. The words came out as a choked whisper. The guests from the rehearsal who were present, the ones who had witnessed the incident, all recognized them instantly. The color drained from their faces as the horrifying truth began to dawn on them. They had laughed and snickered as the daughters of Marcus Coleman were thrown out like trash. Marcus's calm expression finally broke. His gaze turned to ice. He fixed his eyes on Haley, and the full, formidable power of his presence was now directed at her like a laser. "They are not just girls," he said, his voice low and dangerously cold. "They are my daughters, Ava and Aria Coleman." He let that statement hang in the air for a moment, letting the weight of it crush Haley. Then he delivered the final devastating blow. "And this estate you're standing in, this venue you thought you rented?" He paused, letting the silence become unbearable. "It's mine." The silence that fell was no longer just tense. It was absolute. It was like a hammer blow, a physical force that sucked all the air out of the room. Haley Prescott went from pale to ghostly white. Her legs felt weak, as if her bones had turned to water. She reached out a hand to steady herself on the back of a chair. The world was tilting on its axis. The two dirty girls she had humiliated, the ones she had dismissed as maids, were the daughters of the billionaire who owned everything. The ground she was standing on, the very air she was breathing, it all belonged to them. She had not just insulted two strangers. She had walked into the lion's den and slapped the lion's cubs. And now the lion was looking at her. And he was not happy. The fall of Haley Prescott was not a loud, explosive event. It was a quiet, systematic dismantling of her entire world, conducted with the cold precision of a surgeon. Marcus Coleman stood at the podium, a figure of unshakable authority. He did not yell, he did not lecture. He simply laid out the facts. "Yesterday," he began, his voice echoing in the silent room, "my daughters came to this estate to offer their congratulations to the Carter family. They came dressed simply as they often do because we believe that a person's worth is not defined by the label on their clothes." His eyes found Haley, and they held her in place. They were met not with courtesy but with cruelty. They were publicly humiliated, insulted, and ordered to be removed from the property, all because of how they looked. Haley opened her mouth to speak, to deny, to explain. I didn't know," she stammered. "That is the entire point," Marcus cut her off, his voice sharp. "You didn't know. You judged them without knowing. You assumed the worst of them because they did not meet your superficial standards. And in doing so, you showed us your true character." He gestured toward the large screen behind him. It flickered to life. The first thing that appeared was a sound wave graphic. Then a voice filled the room. Liam's voice, clear and steady from the memo he had recorded. He was recounting the entire incident, word for word. He repeated Haley's sneering comments. "Dressed like maids. We don't let people like you near family photos. Go back to cleaning tables." Hearing her own ugly words played back to the silent, judgmental room was a new kind of horror for Haley. She flinched as if she had been physically struck. When the recording finished, Marcus spoke again. That was the testimony of Mr. Liam Carter, a member of the catering staff. He gestured toward Liam, who sat watching, his expression grim but resolute. A young man who had the courage to document the truth, knowing it could cost him his job. Then the screen changed. It now showed security footage. The silent, grainy video played out the scene for everyone to see. Haley's aggressive march across the lawn, her dismissive gestures, the twins' calm and dignified retreat as the security guard escorted them away. There was no audio, but there didn't need to be. The visual evidence was damning. We have testimony from over a dozen other staff members, Marcus continued, his tone relentless, all of whom have described a pattern of bullying, disrespect, and verbal abuse from Miss Prescott over the past several months. Eleanor Davis, your own wedding planner, has provided a detailed log of these incidents. He nodded toward Eleanor, who met his gaze with a look of quiet gratitude. Haley's defenses crumbled. The denials died in her throat. She turned to her fiancé, her eyes pleading. "Liam, say something. Tell them it was a misunderstanding." But her fiancé wouldn't look at her. He was staring at his own shoes, his face a mask of shame and horror. His family's name was being dragged through the mud because of her actions. His mother, the woman Ava and Arya had come to see, was looking at Haley with an expression of pure disgust. Finally, Haley's arrogance gave way to sheer panic. "I'm sorry," she cried out, the words desperate. "Okay? I'm sorry. It was a mistake. I was stressed. The wedding. I wasn't thinking." "It was not a mistake, Miss Prescott," Marcus said, his voice like ice. "It was a choice. You chose to be cruel. The Coleman Group has a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination and harassment of any kind. This is not just a policy for our employees. It extends to our clients and anyone who uses our facilities. You violated that policy in the most public and offensive way possible." He paused, letting the weight of his next words settle over the room. "Therefore, effective immediately, your contract with Silverwood Estate is terminated. All payments will be refunded. This venue will not host this wedding. You are to vacate the premises within the hour." A strangled gasp escaped Haley's lips. Her mother let out a cry of despair. "You can't do this!" Haley shrieked, her composure completely gone. "My wedding is today. Everything is planned. All my guests are coming." "Then you should have thought of that before you disrespected my daughters in my house," Marcus replied, his voice devoid of any sympathy. In a final pathetic act of desperation, Haley fell to her knees. The silk pantsuit wrinkled as she knelt on the expensive carpet. "Please," she begged, tears now streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. "Please, I'll do anything. I'll apologize. Please don't do this." But Marcus Coleman remained unmoved. He looked down at the pathetic, sobbing figure on the floor, and he felt nothing but a cold sense of justice. He looked over at his daughters, who stood watching, their expressions not of triumph but of somber resolution. They had not wanted this to happen, but it was the necessary consequence of Haley's actions. Marcus then turned his attention to Liam. "Mr. Carter," he said, his voice now warm and respectful. "Your integrity and courage are qualities we value highly at the Coleman Group. We would like to offer you a full-time salaried position as an operations supervisor here at Silverwood, with a significant pay increase and full benefits." Liam's jaw dropped. He could only nod, completely stunned. Marcus looked back at the security team. "Please escort the Prescott family from the property." He turned his back on Haley, a final, complete dismissal. The show was over. Justice had been served. The wedding of Haley Prescott and Liam Carter never happened. The news of the canceled event and the reason behind it spread like wildfire. It started with whispers among the stunned guests and staff, then exploded online. Someone in the room had leaked a portion of the video, and within hours the story was on every major news outlet and social media platform. The hashtag by Haley trended for a week. Haley Prescott became a national symbol of arrogance and prejudice. Her fiancé, mortified by the scandal and the public shaming of his family, called off the engagement a few days later. Haley lost her fiancé, her dream wedding, and her reputation in a single catastrophic morning. But the story didn't end with her downfall. It ended with a new beginning. Marcus Coleman, true to his word, refunded every penny of the wedding cost. But instead of returning the money to the Prescotts, he did something remarkable. With the Carter family's blessing, he donated the entire sum, over $1 million, to establish a new scholarship fund. It was named the Ava and Aria Coleman Scholarship for Dignity and Leadership, dedicated to helping underprivileged students who demonstrated exceptional character and kindness. The first recipient of a full scholarship was Liam Carter's younger sister, allowing her to attend her dream university. Liam accepted the job at Silverwood and quickly proved to be an excellent manager, known for his fairness and his unwavering defense of the staff. His quiet act of courage inspired a cultural shift at the venue. Other employees who had long been afraid to speak up against mistreatment from wealthy clients now felt empowered to report issues, knowing that management right from the very top had their back. A few weeks later, Marcus walked with his daughters through the pristine gardens of the estate. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the roses that Haley had once complained about. The air was peaceful. "You both did the right thing," Marcus said, putting his arms around their shoulders. "You endured a great insult, and you stayed calm. You showed true strength. That's real power. It's not about how loud you can shout, but about having the conviction to stand for what's right, even when you are standing quietly." Ava looked out at the rolling hills. "She called us dirty and unwanted," she said, her voice soft. "She thought we were invisible, that we didn't matter." Arya smiled, a small, knowing smile. "They mocked us because they couldn't see us," she added. "But they were the ones who were truly blind. They never saw who we really were." Marcus nodded, a deep sense of pride filling his heart. His daughters had learned the most important lesson of all. Status doesn't make you superior. Kindness does. Because the people you underestimate today may own the ground you're standing on. If this story about dignity and justice moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories like this one. What would you have done in this situation? Let us know below.